Good evening, everyone. Shana, if you could give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, perfect. We'll wait for a bit to officially get started, but we won't wait too long because I know I'm sensitive to everybody's time. We'll continue to admit people as they start to log on. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Pete Kurty. I am the principal here at Glacier Ridge, and this is going on my 9th year of being at Glacier Ridge, and I can't believe how the time has flown by. It is certainly an honor and pleasure to be here, and I love getting to know the families and the kids. So hopefully that comes across that it is a wonderful and kind place to be. I'm also joined by a peer of ours that has been at Glacier Ridge for many years, but she is in a new role. I'm joined by Shana Materkoski. I'll have her introduce herself just really briefly, and then we'll continue to get started.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Shana Materkoski. I have been teaching in the education field for about 14 years. I started in Maryland, where I was an intervention specialist, and then moved back to Ohio and continued being an intervention specialist, and then moved to teach 3rd grade here at Glacier, and then Scottish Corners, and came back to Glacier. So I am excited to be in a new role this year.
Thank you. Now we had to choose these dates for our curriculum night way back in end of May, early June, and I don't think anybody had on their radar a Buckeye game, and who would have thought that a Buckeye game would have been on a Thursday? But luckily, curriculum night will be done by 8 o'clock. So thanks for joining us at 5 o'clock, and sorry if it is interrupting your schedule either way, but we appreciate you being here. So we're going to kind of get started. We have our names on that first slide there and our email addresses. So if you have questions, feel free to email us afterwards if you don't ask during the presentation. If you do have questions during the presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do that. But first, we've done introductions. Second, I want to say thank you. It's so important to make sure that we express our gratitude and appreciation. It has been a difficult year and a half and going on 2 years. And as educators, we certainly couldn't have done it without the families and support and collaboration of the full school team and home team in order to support the students. So I know it has not been easy on families, as it hasn't been easy on educators either. But we want to thank you, because you have done a fantastic job supporting us, supporting your children, and working collaboratively. I do want to talk a little bit about norms for a couple of different things. First of all, norms for just this meeting in general. If you have questions, the purpose of this is to really address your questions. You have a couple of options. You can type them in the chat, and Shane is going to monitor the questions right in the chat, and you can ask them either at the end if we didn't address your question, or you can ask the question as they come up during the presentation. So either way is definitely fine, but if you would please put them in the chat, that would be great. As I mentioned earlier, if you want to email us, that would be fine too, if you are not comfortable emailing it or saying it or typing it in the chat for everybody. I want to talk about a couple of norms just in general as well. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot one thing. If you could stay on mute as well, that would be great. And norms in general, I just want to thank you for your flexibility and patience as we've navigated this past couple of years or year or so. And the reason I say flexibility and patience is because decisions typically take a long time. They're very thoughtful. They're very purposeful. But in a pandemic, we've noticed that there had to have been a lot of last minute decisions, a last minute information, because information is constantly changing. So although you would love information in a timely manner or want information to make a decision, I know it's frustrating, but I'd ask that you please continue to be understanding and patient, and thank you for that flexibility. I'd also ask in this time of extreme frustration and passion that we press pause. A lot of times, we often need some time to process things and need some time to really internalize information before we decide what to react on and what to move forward with. So it's one thing we talk about as a staff a lot is pressing pause. And as we receive information or as there are things that make us react, sometimes pressing that pause will allow us to make the best, most informed decision, and then the actions will help us get really the outcome we are hoping for. So again, pressing pause will be a great norm and great strategy for everyone this year. The other thing we talk about as a staff is seeking more information without judgment. Listening, how to actively listening to seek for understanding. And that goes along with our message, which we'll talk about, but kindness and empathy. And listening and empathy go very well together. So as you press pause, think about how we can gather more information without judgment so that we can make the most informed decision and we can continue to work collaboratively. So those are just some norms I wanted to talk about that we have really talked about as a school staff. And then goals, just briefly, we have not completely identified our building goals yet in a formal sense this year, but I will say that some of the major things that we are continuing to focus on are building classroom and school community. We have gained our RLA students back into the building. And some new students in general have moved into our attendance area. So we always do, but even more importantly this year, building classroom community and a school community. We're also continuing to focus on social emotional learning and needs in general. In this world, in a pandemic, it's very stressful, and that can come out and manifest in a lot of different ways. So we're really focusing on the social emotional needs of students and sometimes families if they need that support as well. And then of course, academics. That I mentioned that last, but those were in no particular order. And academics still remains a true focus. Although sometimes if you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sometimes you can't get to academics if there are other needs that are not being met. But we are constantly thinking about our instruction and thinking about the academic needs of students as well. If you are familiar with Glacier Ridge, you may have heard who we are at Glacier Ridge, and I'm actually going to turn it over to Shana Materkoski. And if you were not here at the very beginning when we did introductions, she is our new admin intern, which acts as a very similar role to an assistant principal. So Shana, I'm going to turn it over to you and have you do the next few slides.
Great. So our motto of Choose Kind is taken from the book Wonder. And hopefully you have heard your child come home and talk about our Choose Kind motto here at Glacier Ridge. We teach children that our actions and behavior are a choice, a conscious choice, and it goes well beyond that kindness. And we frequently discuss how this impacts or affects other. So our Choose Kind motto is not just choose kind, but how do we choose kind in the hallway and in the classroom or at the lunchroom. So we incorporate it all throughout our day that surrounds really our motto. And you'll often hear the phrase that we use a lot with the start with hello, find a connection, create a friendship. And then we have several activities throughout the year around this phrase and concept. So we are actually going to be ready to kick off this initiative this year at our annual Tiger Trot. This one this year is a little bit revamped to focus on community building and tiger conservation. And then it's all wrapped up by our PTO fundraising event. So. All right, inclusion. So there's several different ways that we focus on inclusion of all students here at Glacier Ridge. And we have a variety of different strategies in place to make sure that students feel comfortable here at school. One is that we have new student ambassadors, and we have a variety of different ways that we use our new student ambassadors. One is with new students here at Glacier Ridge, and then also our RLA students that came back to the classroom. So having that ambassador to show them around, make connections so that they feel comfortable and can make a friendship with somebody in the class. As well as, if you remember at the beginning of the year, your child came home and talked about that we started having our recess locations. And this was really to build a strong classroom community. We found that last year, when we did our zones, that it made their classroom feel a connection by working with each other, and they got to be outside together and interact with each other and make connections. And so that is why we started to help build that classroom community this year with those locations. Each classroom also focuses on a morning meeting, and they work on social connections and connections at least one time per week, but they learn more about each other through these morning meetings. In addition to all these things, we also have One School, One Book. And our book this year was The World Needs Who We Were Meant to Be. And the classrooms all read this book. They discussed what it meant. And we found that we are all unique. And by working together and embracing everybody's special talents, that we were able to have a stronger strength to accomplish different tasks. So. All right. And then next is our communication. So there's several different ways that we communicate, and we know that communication is so important between school and home. And so there's a variety of different methods for you to get information. And I'm sure at times it may feel a bit overloaded with information and different information's coming. However, it is better than the alternative. So we have our school newsletter that you'll receive on Fridays, our PTO newsletters on Monday, our PTO Facebook, and it's the Glacier Ridge Elementary PTO, and you can find it on Facebook, and then also our website. Teachers have a Bloom's account, and you should have been notified by your teacher to sign up for this, and then also receive emails periodically through email. Again, your teacher will probably communicate through Bloom's, mostly with pictures and giving you that insight to the classroom, and then also still reach out periodically through that email. For the district, they have the newsletter on Mondays, and you can also access more information through the DCS app. If you're not receiving any of these communications, please let the office know, or if you are having difficulty signing up for Bloom's, then go ahead and let your teacher know that as well, and we can help you out. So.
Great, thanks, Shana. I'm going to transition a bit to some of our mitigation strategies that we have at the building level, and this may be a little redundant for some, so I won't dig into it too much, but if this is an area that we have questions, feel free to type them into the chat. So if you weren't here when we first started, feel free to type in some questions, or we'll have that opportunity at the end as well. So some of our mitigation strategies are in multiple areas. First of all, in classrooms, we are able to maintain 3 feet of distance in the classroom. Although that is not all of the time. Sometimes students are talking together, closer together, but more or less they are 3 feet apart. Their seats are definitely spaced 3 feet apart. So we do maintain distance in the classroom. We also have assigned seats. Those do change frequently as well, but we have assigned seats for contact tracing periodically, or we'll change them periodically, but they are for the purpose of contact tracing. And then hand washing and sanitation, sanitizing. We have those practices in place. There's sanitizer at the entrance to the classroom, so it's a general practice that they sanitize going in and out of the classroom, as well as outside to recess. Frequently, parents will ask me, "What can I do to help? What is something that I can do to help support my child?" Although it's kind of an odd area in terms of mitigation strategies, I would just ask you to remind them about physical distancing. Kids are such social beings, and they want to engage, and they are not always thinking about the 3 feet. Which is probably good, but we want to make sure that they continue to reinforce that they understand the 3 feet is for health strategies in general. A second thing I want to talk about of something that you can do is in the class, or although we're talking about mitigation strategies, ask them how they're doing today, or tell me something about school today. In our newsletter on Friday, we're going to put that as part of our an article and some resources for you. But so much of our world is about health and safety right now. But as I mentioned at the beginning, as one of our goals, we want to still continue to focus on academics and all of the things that are going on in the classroom. So those are just some things that are going on for mitigation strategies in the classroom. Breakfast and lunch. There is hot and cold options still, and breakfast is ordered along with lunch in the morning. And we have had some lunch changes, so we apologize for that, and we'll talk about that in our newsletter on Friday. But breakfast is take home. So the students will order it in the morning, but take it home at the end of the day to be eaten that next day. And whether they do that or not, I'm not sure, but that is definitely when we order it. In lunch, we are also maintaining 3 feet of distancing. Granted, masks are not worn during lunch. That is, if you have listened to Dr. Marshausen's talk about mitigation strategies, that is one of our most vulnerable times. But what we are doing is encouraging the students to put their masks up at the 15-minute mark. And or if they are more comfortable, then they can take a bite and put their mask up as well. So that is our attempt to negate the close contact during lunch when they are not there. What can parents do during breakfast and lunch? One thing that we ask is help encourage and remind your students about masking and eating. I know that is definitely something that is tricky. So if they could practice taking a bite and putting their mask up, or reminding them to keep track of their mask, and we remind them at the 15-minute mark. We have a few other mitigations that are still coming to light a little bit, and it may have been, this is something that we didn't necessarily talk about at the beginning of the year, but volunteers are limited, and you may have heard that phrase. The district is just, it's a very vague phrase right now, but we are just seeing what that looks like in terms of in the building and what capacity that looks like. So we are limiting visitors, but last year, if you remember, visitors were restricted. We didn't have any visitors. So we are doing limited visitors, which is why you're seeing curriculum night being virtual. So instead of having all of the families in and sitting in a classroom with the teacher, we're doing virtual. So we're doing some things to help keep down the number of people and traffic through the building, but we are moving in the right direction where visitors are not restricted. We have received confirmation that field trips are canceled for at least the time being. So we will not have field trips in the fall, and we'll continue to revisit this as a district. So that is a district-wide decision. But at least for now, there are not field trips. And then parties, we're not sure what parties are going to look like, but my guess is it'll be in a different capacity as well. Typically, parties have a lot of parents in here, so we're not sure what those will look like, but we'll continue to get word. And that goes back to one of the norms that we talked about at the very beginning, flexibility and patience. Although parties is definitely something that is important and a priority, we're not sure what that looks like, and it's going to be dependent on the current health situation. I'm going to transition to quarantine a little bit. This is a very complicated process. And the complication comes from this very complicated flow chart. So I'm going to just start by telling you that quarantine is not determined by the school system. Quarantine is determined, the length of quarantine is determined by the Franklin County Public Health. And that is who we as a district follow as a health department. So the Franklin County Public Health tells us the length of the quarantine based on a variety of circumstances and situations that students or the close contact was in. So I want to draw your attention to the very top. At the very top, it has 3 major points. And that affects sometimes the length of the quarantine and whether the child is quarantined at all. First is masking for students. So if your child is wearing a mask, and we are, that is definitely an important factor, although I did mention that masks in lunch are definitely a vulnerability. I'll also tell you that on the bus, masks are a vulnerability because of the second reason here. The second reason says strategies to minimize physical distancing, which is at least 3 feet between desks. We are doing that as part of our spacing and physical distancing at Glacier Ridge, but on the bus, it is impossible to get 3 feet of distancing from all students on the bus. So that is another vulnerable component. So if your child rides a bus, that does make them a little bit vulnerable because they are not 3 feet away. In Glacier Ridge, they are, and they are wearing masks. So the first 2 in terms of schooling are okay. And then the third one is prevention policies in general, and that's mitigation strategies, hand washing protocols, safety types of protocols that we have in place, cleaning. So those are all things that we put in place last year and have just continued this year. So if you follow this, and unfortunately, you can see that vaccination is a component of it. So students aren't vaccinated, but if we follow all of these, then individuals may remain safely in person anyway. Again, the factors that would contribute to that are lunch and the bus. But other than that, if a student is following those and they are close contact to somebody else that tests positive, they will not have to quarantine. Then if we go to, are they vaccinated? And if they are not vaccinated, but they were wearing a mask, then this flow chart says that if they were not vaccinated and were wearing a mask, then they'll be encouraged to take a test, but they will be able to continue to remain in school and extracurricular activities. So this was the flow chart that came out at the very beginning of the year. And what the one on the bottom talks about is modified quarantine, where they can still participate in extracurricular activities and school. The difference is that they would normally have to quarantine for other things, going to parties, going out and about, going to restaurants. Just this week, the Ohio Department released information that the nurses are still processing, that if all of these top 3 are followed, then it would be no quarantine at all. So not the modified quarantine. So again, students that are wearing masks should be okay, provided that they are not in close contact, but that would depend on the bus and lunch a little bit. Now, if they are in quarantine, I want to talk a little bit about some attendance information. I'm going to jump to the second one, which says attendance during COVID. Unfortunately, attendance still will be documented, but that would be the normal practice anyway. We do have to document when students are not in school. So, but if you write a note, then it will be an excused absence. What House Bill 410 says is that districts are required, and school districts are required to track attendance. and document that in hours, not necessarily days. So we track both excused and unexcused absences. And if you're curious about how we track that, please let me know. But at a certain threshold, which is 38 hours in 1 month or 65 hours in a school year, then that triggers a letter to be sent home. And that, again, is part of House Bill 410, which is required by school districts to follow. That notifies parents that there has been significant number of absences, and that is regardless of whether they are excused or unexcused. It is our job to notify you of those absences, and then the school will work with you. We will work with you if we feel that there is a plan or encouragement to get the student back to school or to school more frequently. I want to talk a little about prearranged absences. We always appreciate knowing when students are going to be absent ahead of time. The prearranged absence form is a form, if you're not familiar with it, letting the school know that your child's not going to be there for a various particular reason. It's mostly used during vacations or trips to visit family or funerals, those types of things. I want to say filling out that form is always helpful, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the absence will be excused. Unfortunately, vacations, regardless of whether that form is completed, is always unexcused. And you can see the list of excused and unexcused absence reasons in the student handbook. Again, I'm not discouraging you from filling out that form because it's important for us to know and communicate with the school and the teacher if you will be out of town, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's excused. And then I also want to mention that the best way to let the school know of absences, and you can even email that form, is notify the office, and the email is on the Glacier Ridge website. There is a large link that says attendance or contact us, and that goes directly to the secretaries, and they forward that information to classroom teachers. I want to provide families with a little bit of resources based on some of the needs of students right now and tied to our goals a little bit. The guidance website, if you have not been on Lori Kuhn, our school guidance counselor's website, it is amazing. This presentation will be provided in our newsletter, and a link to her guidance webpage is in here. You can also get to it through our school website going under the teacher and staff pages. I also want to give you 2 resources for social emotional learning support. Lynn Lyons is a psychologist that focuses on anxiety and support of children and families in general. She has a lot of talking points for parents and families on how to navigate anxiety and just difficult situations in general. And then on your sleeves, I referenced in a newsletter previously, and that is through Nationwide Children's Hospital. That has a lot of social emotional support and guidance for families as well. And then academics, if there is great resources right on our district websites with the math resource that explains a lot about math and has activities for both parents and students. And then I encourage you to visit the curriculum website in general. The pandemic effect is something I want to go over, and it has been a conversation with our staff a little bit. The pandemic, I describe as hurdles in the race that we are running. You may have felt that your child is behind, that your child needs to catch up. If you think of schooling and progression of life as a race, we each race or each year we go through a race, and we have a regular pace that we go through that race. Now, with a pandemic, it is as though someone has thrown hurdles in the middle of our race. But as parents, myself as a parent and as an educator, we are feeling like we need to continue to run that race at the same pace that we normally would. So that stress level and that that pressure to catch kids up is really prevalent. So I want to give you permission to just understand that the whole world slowed down a little bit. It slowed down academically, it slowed down with routines, it slowed down with social emotional learning and support. So although there is that pressure to catch kids up, I would encourage you to really focus on what are their needs. And some of the things that we're noticing here at school are routines. We're having to retrain students with routines, daily routines on just following directions, routines of following a checklist of items, things that they really had the autonomy to do on their own, maybe at home if they were an RLA student. How do they now follow schedules, and can they use the restroom anytime they want or get up at any time they want? So we're really focusing on routines. We're also focusing on continued resilience and social emotional learning, and that goes back to one of our building goals as well. So building community is one way that we tackle that, really building connections and making those networks that the classroom and school community is a safe place. And then academics as well. And again, although academics may need to be after those first two, we are really putting an emphasis on academics to focus on what are their academic needs that they may have missed over this time of a pandemic. So I've provided a lot of information. We have some time between the next curriculum session, which I believe is kindergarten, but I wanted to address any questions that you might have, and you can feel free to type them into the chat. You're welcome to mention them either over the chat, or if you want to unmute, that's fine too. If there are no questions, I also mentioned that this presentation will be emailed out in our newsletter on Friday, and you're welcome to either sort through it there in process, or you're welcome to email us directly. So I will just pause briefly.
And then Pete, I do have just a few questions so in the chat. So one is, what is the criteria for DCS to remove the mask mandate?
Yep, that is a good question. What's the criteria for DCS to remove the mask mandate? You know, I will say that there is not a specific criteria that I am aware of. I know that they're trying to offer some flexibility in terms of exemptions. I know they have switched their stance on masks. So I don't know what Dr. Marshausen would say the criteria is, or if there is clear criteria. I will say though that they do they do consult with the doctors committee that the district is using. So probably recommendations from the doctors committee, and also specific guidance from Franklin County. If you look at guidance from Franklin County Public Health, Ohio Department of Health, and the CDC, all three of those recommend masks. They are not mandating masks. And I know there's a lot of contention or semantics around what the difference between mask, mandate versus recommendation. But I think the district stance was that we want kids in school, and I know families want kids in school as well. And as I went through that flow chart, you notice that if students are not wearing masks, then they could be quarantined. So I don't have a clear-cut answer for you, but I know that we are following at least the recommendation of those health departments, and then I'm sure that the Board of Education and district leadership will heavily take the guidance from that medical committee as well. I know we also had a direct message to Shana, and we will address that with that one participant as well. We'll give that person a call and address that conversation. Again, if you have questions, feel free to email us or call the school or anything that you need. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you jumping on. If you need anything in the meantime, let me know. But your collaboration, your support, and again, going back to those norms at the beginning of our presentation of flexibility, patience, kindness, and pressing pause is so much appreciated and felt wholeheartedly. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening. And if you are a Buckeye fan, go Bucks. If you're another fan, then more power to you as well. So take care and have a wonderful